Hello and welcome to the channel. This is the first episode and the hidden leaf has lost its purpose till a mishap. The Hiratian seal pulls Tobarama back into Naruto's era. He's not about to let Hashirama's dream be trampled, even if it means burning the village to the ground. Please like and subscribe for more epic twists. Now, let us begin. When he slapped a hand down to the ground, releasing a burst of chakra in order to form his new transportation seal, he expected two outcomes. Either he shredded himself into a bloody pulpy mess and thus do the job of the Kinkaku squad for them because he was too hasty to properly check his seal, which was a beginner's mistake and something he hadn't done since he was a child, or he lands miles away from the fight because his experimental seal actually worked. As he hunched over his last desperate move, glaring down Kinkaku's oncoming attack, he poured his chakra into the seal he formed from his own memory and chakra. For the first time in a long time, he prayed and begged for something to work and save him. Then in a blinding flash of blue, Kinkaku was gone and the blazing fire of chakras that seared at his senses had disappeared as if they were never there. The sheer force of chakra exhaustion slammed into him, making his joints weak and give out. Tobarama lay there blinking the growing number of black spots from his vision. Tree leaves danced and shifted above, letting hypnotizing rays of light trickle through. Around him, familiar traces of his departed older brother. He breathed deep, head spinning in a riot. He'd made it back to the land of fire. His brother's trees stood sentinel over him, still watching over him. Tobarama let his eyes close as an incredibly bright beam of light crossed his face and lingered there. He'd rest before moving again. His village, his team needed him. Mito, his nieces and nephews, Tsunechan. He'd get back to them as soon as he could hold a more coherent thought. The next time he opened his eyes, he knew he'd been asleep for a long time. His body was stiff, his mouth dry, and his chakra mildly restored from the dredges it had been before. Tobarama calculated that it had probably been about 9 hours given his chakra levels. A stupid amount of time to remain vulnerable and asleep. You're alive. A stupid amount of time to remain unaware too. He felt slow as he contorted his body from a prone position into a low crouch, kunai gripped in both hands. His lips twitched to hiss and bare his teeth like his summons had taught him to do so long ago. But what he found in front of him wasn't a threat. Not like he was expecting. A young and small blonde child stood in front of him with some of the brightest blue eyes Tobarama's ever seen. His own red eyes narrowed as he took in the way those blue orbs darted between his weapons before the boy shrunk in on himself and shuffled back a step. The boy was small actually. On dirted and scratched cheeks, Tobarama could make out his cheekbones and jaw easily. Malnourishment. Even his clothes, baggy, worn, and dirty as they were hung off of too thin shoulders and gaped around tiny limbs. For the sake of the sage, the kid wasn't even wearing shoes. The sight of an obviously starving child made something cold and angry turn over in his stomach, but he pushed it aside for now in favor of very slowly loosening his fingers around his kunai. Easy, he murmured lowly, letting the weapons dangle from his pinkies. I won't hurt you. Tobarama was trying to figure out if the boy was shinobi or civilian born, and the lingering suspicious look he got made him start favoring the former. Then any murky distrust cleared up in a look of understanding the man couldn't follow. Oh. I snuck up on you, huh? That's why you got your ninja weapons. My bad. Tobarama felt his head tilt to the side as the boy laughed at himself before running a hand under his nose in the careless way children do. Say, that's a good ninja thing, right? Being able to sneak up on another ninja. The boy pointed at Tobarama's head, where the leaf symbol was carved into his hapuri. At least the child was familiar with Konoha and didn't feel threatened. The Hokage carefully moved out of his crouch and instead sat on his heels, careful to keep himself small and still. He didn't miss at all the way the kid maintained his distance and twitched at every large movement, especially when he moved his hands. A vital skill, he agreed, resting his chin on his knees. Do you want to become a ninja? Yeah. Tobarama would admit he had to suppress a flinch at the suddenly loud voice. I'm gonna be such a awesome ninja, just you watch. I'll become Hokage, believe it. Uh, well. The current Hokage tilted his head to briefly hide his mouth against his knees, not trusting his lips to stay still. Hokage, he repeated curiously, cocking an eyebrow as he got his expression under control. You're a bit young, aren't you? So? The tiny blonde, he'd never really seen a blonde like this before. Not even little Tsunechan's hair was this bright and golden, pouted and crossed his arms. I'll be the youngest Hokage ever, believe it. Don't you dare laugh at me. His other eyebrow rose up to join the first. I'm not laughing, he assured the child. If anything, I do believe you. Knowing what you want, what your goal is as early as possible so you can work as hard as you can, that's good. The boy's eyes widened to impossible size and his breath audibly caught. You believe me, he whispered, and Tobarama wanted to curse whoever decided to put this child down for his dreams. Yes, he was a realist and a pragmatic, a complete and total nihilistic cynic at times as well, he would admit, but just because he couldn't dream anymore didn't mean others shouldn't. Besides, he was more than willing to give up the hat at this point. If the boy wanted it and could protect and lead the village adequately enough, let him have it. Sara was going to be tired of the stupid hat soon enough, no doubt. Tobarama hummed and bobbed his head, trying to affect the serious expression he'd used to convince the council of his ideas and plans. Given you work and train hard, eating your vegetables and attending your studies, you can become Hokage. He fully expected the boy to blanch at the idea of eating vegetables and following his lessons. His nieces and nephews always did when they were younger, and even Tsunechan had done it. Still does if Tobarama's honest. He just pretends not to notice when the little girl flicks her veggies into his bowl. But the boy looked as if he'd been struck. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as a bright flush rose on his cheeks and his eyes took a distressingly shiny sheen. The man braced for imminent tears, mentally flailing to figure out what he'd said wrong, before the boy visibly steeled himself. His chin trembled worryingly, but he blinked rapidly and took a deep breath. All right. Right. I'll be the best. The boy's voice cracked here and his eyes squinted hard in a wide, toothy grin. Tobarama let him pretend he didn't see the tear that slipped out of the corner of his eye. The best Hokage. Believe it. I do, Tobarama replied quietly, sincerely. He wondered if that was the kid's favorite phrase right now. I'm Tobarama. It was still a habit to never give a family name. You? What's the name of my future Hokage? He asked teasingly in a rather stilted voice. He was still trying this joking thing Kagami and Torafu were on his case about. Izuna would be laughing himself sick at the mere thought. If it was possible, the child's smile widened even further. He sniffled and Tobarama was thankful to see that the oncoming tears had been averted. I'm Naruto Uzumaki and I'm going to be the 5th Hokage. Yuzu 5th? That's a rather specific number. Tobarama was horrified at the implications that an Uzumaki child was out in the wilderness starving. His sister-in-law was going to murder someone, he just knew it. He'd leave the pointed questions for later because he definitely wasn't going to leave the child, Naruto, here. No, it's not. Naruto crossed his arms and visibly thought hard about something. For all his genius, Tobarama sometimes had a hard time following the logic of children. They made jumps and associations that he didn't. The 4th Hokage may be dead, but he saved the village from the fox. Everyone knows that. Gigi may be Hokage again, but the next person will be the 5th Hokage. 1, 2, 3, and 4. See? I can count. Tobarama didn't know where to start with that. Everyone knew that the 4th Hokage had saved the village from the fox. The 9-tailed fox? But that wasn't possible. The Kyuubi was sealed inside of Mito, the seal mistress keeping the chakra being firmly under her watch and refusing to be a threat to the village. Tobarama knew that if there was any doubt of the seal's integrity, Mito would have sought him or her home clan out for assistance. But what else could be referred to as the fox? Not to mention the reference to the fourth Hokage and alluding to this, Gigi, being the third Naruto. The blonde hummed. Who's the current Hokage right now? The boy frowned, his eyes flicking to the leaf symbol on his forehead. You don't know. Gigi's been around forever. Yes, but what is his name? I'm not sure. Gigi's always been Gigi, you know? Naruto scratched the back of his head, grumbling to himself. He always checks up on me. Ever since I could remember. Oh. Tobarama tried to calm his racing heart and spinning thoughts as the boy perked up. I heard other adults and stuff call him something. They always yell at me for calling him Gigi. Say no espos to, he mumbled petulantly, and Tobarama shifted, having to mentally keep a hold of his patience and composure. Naruto straightened. They always say to call him Sandami-sama. Is that his name? It can't be. Too stuffy for Gigi, Tobarama swallowed dryly. Is his name Hiruzen Sarutobi? He almost wished joy hadn't dawned on Naruto's face. Yeah. That's the one. Monkey, monkey. The boy giggled and hooted like a monkey while Tobarama silently crumbled in on himself. That wasn't possible. Not enough time had passed for Sara to be properly placed in office, let alone enough time for a fourth Hokage to be selected and inaugurated. But. His seals. His Hiration. They dealt with space and time. That had been the crucial addition that Mito had suggested he try in order to perfect the jutsu. Tobarama tried to recall the exact seal he'd formed during battle. His eidetic memory failed him as it usually did in times of high stress and trauma and overstimulus. He cursed his fallible mind. Just when he needed answers. Where else could he search for answers? Home. Naruto. Yeah. How far from here is the Hidden Leaf Village? How far? We're already in the Hidden Leaf Village. Well then. By the time they actually reached the central administration building, Tobarama was having to nearly choke himself trying to restrain his killing intent. If he wasn't getting double takes and gaping expressions, then the little boy perched on his back was getting glares and hisses and curses. He hadn't understood why Naruto tried insisting they take super secret ninja paths until the first mutter of demon child was spat in their direction. Naruto sniffled and buried his face deeper in Tobarama's fur mantle, his grip never wavering on him and his small heart beating trustingly against his back. Truly, he was the only thing keeping Tobarama from losing his temper at the moment. Step back, he snarled when an Umbu stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. Well, most of his temper. The small flinch he felt go through Naruto was pretty good incentive to hold back. He turned his head to nudge his chin against blonde hair. Sorry, he murmured, stepping past the paralyzed Umbu. I'm not mad at you, he promised. Naruto hummed in answer, but didn't lift his face from the fur. Tobarama would take what he could. Deadly glares and pointed blasts of killing intent let him progress easily into the upper portions of the tower and straight to his office. Or, what used to be his office. He opened the door quite civilly, finding satisfaction in taking an unassuming approach to the steady and familiar chakra signature that hadn't been made aware of his presence. Sage above, Saru had gotten old. Tanned, sun-spotted, and wrinkled skin graced his former student's face. It was hard to see his student in the old man. He couldn't quite reconcile the youthful, shocked, and scared face of Saru with the man currently occupying the Hokage's desk. To him, it had only been a little over a day since he'd last seen Saru. But if the changed village set up and the four faces now carved into the cliff hadn't convinced him, then he wouldn't be a genius. Yes, the old man grunted, his eyes still flicking over a piece of paper as Tobarama shut the door behind him. He activated the privacy seals of the room with a bit too much chakra edged in rage than he should have, but if it made Saru stiffen and jerk his eyes to glare at him, well. Tobarama always had enjoyed taking his enemies by surprise. Hiruzen Sarutobi, he gritted out, a flame worthy of the uchiha lighting in his chest. How dare you sit in this office as if you have a right? The pipe that his old student had been smoking fell from limp lips. Say sensei, he rasped, bracing his hands on his desk. What kai? Tobarama sneered, unimpressed. This isn't a genjutsu. I am not an imposter. He slammed the full force of his diminished chakra out, taking extra care to gently envelop Naruto in his chilly chakra rather than let him feel the press of it. The boy shivered and lifted his head curiously, and Tobarama wondered if anyone had ever offered the boy such a comfort. Naruto was absolutely blazing with chakra at such a young age. To feel someone stronger able to contain and calm his chakra should have been familiar to him, but Tobarama couldn't bear to finish that train of thought lest he become actually enraged. The Umbu who appeared in the room, weapons drawn, struggled to withstand his onslaught of strength. Do you doubt me? Saru, Tobarama challenged. The old man quickly shook his head, sweating under the weight of his chakra. Aside from Kagami, Saru always had been the smartest of his students. Good to know he still kept his wits. The former Hokage gathered his chakra back to himself, but kept Naruto shrouded and covered in his protection. Stand down. Tobarama barked when one of the Umbu twitched. Stand down. Saru repeated, and only then did the force take a step back. Leave us. Interestingly enough, they didn't obey. The one in the dog mask with the distinctive chakra of a Hatake turned his head. He has Naruto, Lord Hokage. Saru jerked and his eyes zeroed in on the tuft of blonde peeking over Tobarama's shoulder. The senju bounced Naruto a bit higher to allow Saru to see. Hi, Gigi, he greeted shyly, quietly. Naruto, Sarutobi murmured before catching the thunderous expression on his old sensei's face. Oh yes, Tobarama thought vindicatively as Saru paled drastically. He knew what he'd done wrong. The apparent third Hokage swallowed before clearing his throat. I am aware. Dismissed. The Umbu flickered out of sight, leaving the room, but lingering outside the windows, doors, and vents. Sensei, no, Tobarama growled. You've lost the privilege of calling me that. Sarutobi flinched. I am livid with you, Saru. I wake up after fleeing my fight with the Kinkaku squad and find an Uzumaki child in my brother's old playground, which has become more treacherous than I remember. I find him. Tobarama bit his cheek to stop himself before once again turning his head to peer over his shoulder. Naruto's bright blue eyes were shadowed and weary now. Naruto-kun, he started in a softer, quieter tone, I'm most likely going to raise my voice. I have a jutsu that can mute your hearing. Do you want me to use it? The boy's eyes widened in surprise before looking back to where his Gigi was rising to his feet slowly and shakily. Want to listen, believe it, he muttered, burying his face in Tobarama's fur mantle once more, his arms and legs squeezing tighter. I want to know, he continued, his voice barely audible with as muffled as it was. Tobarama nodded and chinned the top of the boy's head for a moment, swearing to try to keep his voice down. Very well. Hiruzen Sarutobi, I should call for an inquisition on your doings and failings. I found Naruto Uzumaki in the 44th training ground, alone, hunting for food because no one would let him buy anything. Tobarama gnashed his teeth, his breathing picking up a small bit with his growing ire. I was told that it's fine. It's fine because Gigi would be giving him his allowance soon and knew he went there for food. The man had to resist the urge to yell or shove Sarutobi out the window as the old man leaned on his hands on the desk, eyes squeezed shut and breathing carefully measured. Saru's chakra wasn't anywhere near as controlled and composed, a riot of guilt and shame. He tells me that he lives on his own. A child. At 5 years old. Is left by clan and village alone. Reviled and hated for having the same chakra as my sister. Something he himself knows nothing about. Do you understand the very basics of what I'm trying to say? Yes, sensei, came the prompt response. Do you understand why the Hidden Leaf Village was founded? Yes, sensei. Then why, Tobarama hissed, his sage marks tingling and itching to grow and be released, has the very same village that was made to protect children abandoned one? Silence. Why has the Hokage, my former student, so blatantly and knowingly turned his back on an innocent child? More silence. Sarutobi, you will answer me, he whispered, his vision sharpening and narrowing in on only his student in a manner he usually did with enemies. The old man cringed before opening his eyes. He kept them lowered, good, and blew out a breath. It's complicated. Tobarama could not believe what he was hearing. When the silence dragged on, Sarutobi eventually risked lifting his gaze. Whatever expression was on his face had the old man stumbling back a step, knocking his chair over. Let me be perfectly clear, Sarutobi. You will uncomplicate this. You will fix this hatred that has taken root in the village, or so help me, my brother's dream or not, I will burn it to the ground. Am I understood? The third Hokage nodded mutely. Good. Rescind all guardianship rights you have over Naruto Uzumaki and transfer them to me. Tobarama schooled his expression once more, returning to his stoic mask. I am ashamed to have been your teacher, Sarutobi. With that, he reached out for one of his classic Eurasian markers that he left during his walk through the village and disappeared out of the office. He landed on top of what used to be an apothecary, but was now a flower shop. For a long moment, he looked out over the alien village and tried to accept that this was the Hidden Leaf Village. It was the shifting on his back that drew his attention back to the here and now. I'm sorry you had to hear that, he apologized softly. He felt the boy shake his head. "It's okay. You weren't mad at me. I like Gigi, but has he really messed up?" The man nodded grimly. "More than you can know." "And you're his sensei?" "Was. But yes. Then it's your job to yell at him and teach him, yeah?" "A sensei's job is to impart knowledge and guide their students," Tobarama corrected. "Not to yell and cow them and belittle them." "Yeah, that." Naruto lifted himself higher onto Tobarama's shoulders and sucked in a sharp breath. Whoa! The village looks so cool from up here. Tobarama had to admire the sound and look of admiration and warmth coming from the boy. He'd merely seen a glimpse of how Naruto was treated, and yet the child still looked out upon the village like it was something incredible and precious, babbling away as he pointed out the things he could see and where he himself had climbed up. For a moment, he recalled a younger Hashirama gushing over the flowers and plants he'd found, and an even older Hashirama sitting on the cliff to point out how the village had grown, as if Tobarama hadn't been there at his side helping grow it. He missed his Anija. Hey. Toby G. Aji, Tobarama corrected, shrugging when the boy made a huh sound. I believe I'm distantly related to you, an uncle in some way if not a cousin. Wait, really? Tobarama shifted and adjusted his arms as the boy scrambled up and over his shoulder. It had been a while since a child used him for climbing practice, but he was rather tall. He'd gotten a lot of practice in making sure a little one didn't fall. We're family, Naruto demanded. But we don't look anything alike. The man huffed and smiled ruefully. I look nothing like my family. My Anija had dark skin, brown eyes, and brown hair. Much the same as the rest of my family. But my brother did marry Mito Uzumaki, the firstborn daughter of the clan head at the time. So, yes, I think we're related in some way. Two have family. A clan? The boy asked, stunned beyond all belief. Yes, Tobarama confirmed with every ounce of certainty and authority he had. For simplicity's sake, we'll say I'm your uncle. You are my nephew. We'll figure out where the rest of the Uzumakis got off to. The look of excitement and joy rocked Tobarama down to the bone. It had been quite some time since anyone so happily claimed him as family. He hugged his nephew back tightly, soothing the sad and biting cracks in his raging fire chakra. Everyone else had seemingly forgotten why the Hidden Leaf Village was founded, but not Tobarama. If he had to, he'd look after every child himself. "I'm home," Naruto called as he unlocked the very inadequate metal bolt lock and opened the door to his apartment. His apartment that was very much in the red light district and looked like it was violating all of the building code requirements he'd drafted upon the village's founding. Tobarama would have to read up on all the current laws to make sure he knew what had changed and what he could use to strike out with. And strike he would, because he had half a mind to flash back to his old office and throttle Sarutobi. The ceiling was bowed and discolored in spots, telling of water damage. The wooden flooring looked more brittle than even Hashirama's earliest attempts at wood for building material, and around the windows and the door he came through were scorch and knife marks as if a confrontation had occurred. That spoke nothing of the bare nothingness in the way of furnishings. There was a ratty futon that might be serviceable, a low table with a single pillow to sit on, a rusty kitchen oven and fridge, and a bathroom that was missing a door. Tobarama could even smell the mold in the air. It was appalling, and Tobarama wondered quickly if the old Senju compound was still standing and habitable. He would need to check post-haste because he was not allowing himself to stay here, let alone a small child with an impressionable immune system. Not that his bijou would let him get sick, but this still couldn't be good for his health. Tobarama toed off his sandals by the door and watched as Naruto made a circuit around the room, checking his futon, a hidden cubby in the floorboards under the futon, in a cardboard box under the sink, which was leaking he noted in distaste, and then in a tiny vent near the bathroom. Even from across the small apartment, Tobarama could see bundles of cloth, some small bags, and other trinkets. The boy bit his lip when he finished his route and caught him staring. "Sometimes I come home and is like someone was here, you know? And sometimes they take my stuff, believe it," he explained as if he was remarking on the weather. Tobarama tskeed and shook his head before reaching up to remove his hapuri. "You've done well to keep your possessions safe. That was clever of you." He ran a hand through his hair, grimacing as he felt days-old sweat and grime in it. Technically, he was only just coming to a place of rest after a mission, an attempted ambush, time travel, and a rather hectic reunion. He hasn't had the chance to go through his usual post-mission routine. He checked his surroundings once more and was pleased to find that no less than 8 Umbu had taken up positions around the apartment building. Good, it seemed like security and threat evaluation hadn't fallen on the wayside for the village. "I can be smart," Naruto crowed, jabbing a thumb at his own chest before grimacing when his stomach audibly rumbled. "Ow," he whined, patting his belly consolingly. Tobarama couldn't restrain a twitch at the reminder that this child was starving. Something in him also relaxed because this was something he could fix right now. "I will cook dinner," Tobarama announced, stepping lightly across the dubious floorboards to see what the boy had in the way of kitchenware and food. "Why don't you take a bath? It's been a long day, I think." "See cook?" Naruto stuttered as if saying the word for the first time. The man paused in the middle of peering into mostly empty cupboards to quirk an eyebrow. "I don't have, Aren't I supposed to cook for you? 'Cause you're the guest." Tobarama tilted his head before returning to his survey of the kitchen. "In normal conventions, you would be right. However, I am your family and the adult in the situation. I will get food and cook." He closed the fridge with finality. Everything was about as empty or bad as he'd thought it was going to be. When he turned back to Naruto, he was a bit surprised to find Naruto flushing bright red and looking slightly panicked. "Nephew? Sprout? What's wrong?" Small hands gripped and pulled at the hem of the threadbare and strained shirt. "There's no food," the child managed to get out as Tobarama took the 3 long steps needed to cross to the bathroom. Once again, Tobarama dropped into a low crouch so as to meet Naruto's gaze on an even level. "I don't have money." Tobarama felt sad momentarily, and angry, but that seemed to be a constant now, before pushing it aside in favor of doing. "I will get food and cook," he repeated coolly. "I am not asking you for money or for anything other than for you to take a bath." Carefully, he reached out and nudged a knuckle to the boy's shoulder, giving him time to see the move. Leave dinner to your uncle, Sprout. A bit underhanded, but it finally seemed to reach Naruto before he could start hyperventilating. Sprout? He repeated, clearing his throat. Tobarama grunted. The Senju clan calls any young one a sprout. Like a small tree or plant. Oh. So it's a nickname? A good one? Yes. Now, into the bath. I'll start dinner. Clean and scrub well or you'll be taking another bath, Tobarama warned, exhaling softly through his nose when Naruto squawked in offense. Once the boy had the water running and was focused, he formed a quick hand sign and used some of his slowly returning chakra to create shadow clones. Or a shadow clone. Tobarama growled quietly to himself at the obvious show of weakness before getting down to business. Go to the market and get basic groceries and cooking tools, he instructed his clone, absently noting that he did look like he'd come fresh from a harsh fight. He pulled an empty storage scroll from his hip pouch and handed it over along with his small stash of emergency money. If this currency is no longer usable, take what you need to and take note of the prices and locations of the stores. I'll repay the funds once I have them. He'd need to check and see if the Senju treasury still existed or if it had been absorbed by the village. Yes, sir, his clone replied before hinging into the appearance of an unassuming civilian. He then disappeared in a flash to one of the markers elsewhere in the village. With that taken care of, Tobarama then moved over to the low table and pulled two other scrolls out. One was filled with his camping supplies and contained extra hygiene and sleeping supplies he'd need later. The other he unrolled and accessed, easily grabbing the sealing ink and paper to begin drafting and painting. In short order, powerful wards, alarms, and traps decorated the apartment's walls and entrances, securing the location to Tobarama's standards. From the bathroom, he could hear Naruto splashing and humming to himself, his chakra lighter and bouncing. Outside the insulated bubble of relative safety he'd made the apartment into, he could sense the placid chakras of the Umbu regularly disturbed with spikes of boredom, concern, confusion, and sometimes even a wave of amusement that would flash around the group of them. Tobarama was familiar with the feeling of gossiping shinobi. His clone returned soon enough and Tobarama rose from where he was sitting to help take the supplies, pleased to see the wealth of greens and the pink of fresh fish. He quickly set a new pan on the rusty stove top and after finagling with the dials, since when did ovens stop needing to be manually lit? He got a small flame going. Do you need me for anything else? The clone asked, keeping his voice down in respect to the child singing off-key in the bathroom. Actually, yes, he replied, pouring a bit of oil into the pan. It was disconcerting that he didn't recognize the labels or merchant names on any of the products. Rice was always safe, however, and he set up a pot on another burner with water. I need to know what remains of the Senju clan. Specifically, in the way of accommodations, funds, and any surviving Senju. He couldn't feel the distinctive chakra characteristic to his own clan, but if he had clan in the village, he would seek them out. The clone nodded and returned to his usual appearance. Right away. But if I'm not returning memories, you should know an Umbu tried to help me. The Hataki one. Tobarama frowned as the clone continued. He slipped supplies into my basket, distracted the shopkeepers while I left, and signaled me into certain shops. He never made direct contact with me, but I also believe he left behind money in payment to the shopkeepers. His frown deepened as he waved his clone away to his next series of tasks. A debt owed. He'd have to see about paying the Hataki back as soon as possible before he tried to call in the favor or use it as leverage. After he set out the new plates and cutlery and felt safe in leaving the fish alone to cook, he entered the bathroom to find Naruto blowing bubbles into the surface. The boy beamed a smile at him. One Tobarama returned with a small one of his own. Finished? He asked as he pulled a towel from the sink and held it open for Naruto. Yeah. Squeaky clean, believe it, he chirped and Tobarama agreed. Now that the child was clean, he realized that the scratches on his cheek weren't actually scrapes or injuries, but natural markings. Whisker markings. It didn't take a genius to figure out what those meant. While Tobarama scrubbed the towel over Naruto's hair, he also noticed that the boy was as skinny and thin as he thought. Not dangerously starved, but very, very hungry for quite some time. It brought up bad memories of when he was still young and Itama and Kawurama were under his care. A harsh and long winter had drained all of the clan's larders and stocks, leaving them hungry and freezing. He remembered feeding a quietly whimpering Itama, soothing a crying Kawurama, and promising Hashirama that he'd eaten, liar, when his Onija managed to grow vegetables on the rare occasion. If Tobarama had taken to selfishly stocking his own food stores and stashes after that solely for his brothers and not the clan, then he'd only stand by his actions. Seeing his brothers cry in despair over the pain of hunger was haunting. There, he announced when Naruto's hair was mostly dry. "Get dressed. Dinner is almost ready. It smells really good, Tobiaji." Naruto scurried out of the bathroom stark naked to a pile of clothes by his futon. Tobarama wrinkled his nose when Naruto did a smell check of his clothes as Tuka had unashamedly bragged once. He mentally added laundry to a growing list of chores, if not outright shopping for new ones. "Is it ramen?" The man gave a short bark of laughter, surprised, while returning to the stove to plate dinner. "Definitely an uzumaki." "No. Just fish and a stir-fry of vegetables and rice." A thought occurred to him belatedly. "Are you allergic to anything?" Naruto blinked slowly as he pulled his head through a shirt. "Allergic?" Tobarama clarified, "Do any foods make your stomach hurt or make you sick?" The boy's face scrunched up. No. I mean, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Like, like, milk. I like milk, but when it's lumpy I have to poop a lot." Tobarama bet. And, I like meat, but most of the stuff I get is like bad smelling." Naruto shrugged. "Even when I really, really cook it, I throw it back up." "I try my best to cook, believe it," he declared happily before shrinking in on himself contemplatively. "But some foods just don't work. Ramen is always good though. Ramen never makes me sick." The former Hokage pushed down a rising tide of affront and offense with growing ease. This was also something he could fix. "Good to know," he said honestly, carrying two plates and chopsticks to the table. "Come eat." Naruto scurried over to the pillow and practically drooled over the painfully simple dinner Tobarama had made. "Thanks for the food," the boy exclaimed before digging in ravenously. "Thank you for the food," he echoed in a quieter voice, watching as the child attacked his food with speed. Inwardly he cursed himself for not making a larger meal. Not only was the boy hungry, but he was an Uzumaki, a clan that had notoriously large appetites. He cut his fish in half first thing before starting in on his own meal. When Naruto polished his plate off in record time, he reached out for it. "I'll get you more, have some of that tea," he instructed. With the boy distracted by smelling the beverage suspiciously, Tobarama's clone had had the foresight to grab a sweeter tea and honey, which was a ridiculous luxury Tobarama hadn't been expecting. He slid half of his fish onto the plate before returning to the stove to plate the rest of the rice and vegetables. He gave the plate back to Naruto but stopped the boy as he went to eat again. "Try eating slowly," he coached, rubbing the back of Naruto's tiny hand with a thumb. "It may be hard," he admitted, recalling his own time of recovering from starvation times or when he'd been imprisoned without food, "but you'll upset your stomach if you shock it too badly with too much food. Give it time to stretch and get used to it." He didn't know the cause of the brief sheen of tears in Naruto's eyes, but he dearly hoped it wasn't out of an incorrect belief that Tobarama wouldn't let him eat or would take his food away. The tears cleared up before Tobarama could explain and Naruto nodded with a wan smile. Yeah. Throwing up isn't fun, you know. Thank you for the food." Tobarama let it go, but struck up a conversation this time, prodding Naruto to answer and speak while also reminding him not to talk with his mouth full. He did so in an effort to help Naruto slow down while eating. He asked Naruto about his favorite places in the village, his favorite foods, and hobbies. It was so normal. He hadn't had such a menial innocuous talk in what felt like an eternity. Ever since becoming head of the Senju clan and Hokage, every word he said was law and he had to think carefully before speaking and evaluate any information given to him with extreme caution. But speaking with Naruto, his nephew, refreshingly free of any burden or expectations. The man was wary when Naruto still managed to clear his plate of food again, but his nephew showed no signs of distress or nausea. In fact, he sighed happily and yawned. Tobarama felt something in him soften at the sight of the child rubbing his eyes sleepily, before steeling himself. "Naruto, I know you are tired, but I wish to speak with you," he announced, waiting and watching for those blue eyes to focus on him. "HM? About what?" Blunt and straightforward has always been his way of handling things, but even he knew he couldn't shatter a child's world so unapologetically. "It's obvious that some truths have been kept from you and I don't want to deceive or lie to you." Much, much later, when the moon was high in the sky and the village slept, Tobarama sat awake in a poor excuse for an apartment, listening to the wet raspy breathing of a child's sleep. He wished he could do something to soothe his little nephew, to wipe away his tears and hold him, but Naruto very clearly had personal space and wasn't used to having someone with him. When he'd crawled under his blanket and cried, giving Tobarama his back, he'd gotten the message and retreated to the opposite side of the apartment. Listening to Naruto cry himself to sleep made something dark and ugly curl and solidify in Tobarama's chest. He never wanted to feel like this. He hadn't felt like this since Hashirama had tried driving a blade into his own heart. But unlike then, he could do something about this. Back then, only Madara could stop that blade and keep Hashirama around. This time, Tobarama could and would reach his family. Tobarama slowly strolled through the trees and bushes, arms crossed and head on a swivel with unseeing eyes. It was odd. This very park was one of the first Hashirama had grown for the village. His Anija had been so eager the moment the suggestion had left Tobarama's lips, and thus this iteration of parks was over the top. Refocusing on the physical world for a moment, he looked up at the looming trees with their boughs so thick and plentiful they practically made a roof over his head. He could remember the trees dancing for Hashirama's happiness and creaking to reach down to touch him. Tobarama had never really understood his brother's connection to nature. Sure, he'd helped his brother learn how to use Mokuton, Yin, and Yang release, and how to wield Sage Chakra, but Tobarama had only really seen chakra and jutsu as tools. Watching Hashirama, one would think the very trees he used to create buildings or shield their village, that every tree and flower had a name and personality. Tobarama didn't envy that level of empathy, especially on someone as compassionate as Hashirama. The popping and fizzy chakra of his little nephew flashed brightly in excitement at his 7 o'clock, 4 meters away. Tobarama wondered if the boy would try to ambush him now, but curiously enough he remained where he was, his excitement growing with every step Tobarama took. Maybe there it was. A rudimentary tripwire trap. Outwardly, he showed no sign of noticing and casually stepped over the obvious rope. Even as surprise and pouting disappointment sunk into the chakra presence, Tobarama felt a curl of pleasant surprise. He had to admit this was the first time a child had tried to trap him. Most kids he watched who wanted to play would try to spar with him or ambush him. As Tobarama lazily circumvented 2 more traps, he found himself smiling at the determined sparks in Naruto's chakra. The boy was a rather ingenious trapper even if he needed lessons in stealth and subterfuge. He continued to stroll through the remote part of the park, letting Naruto hurry to another location to trap it. His mind turned back to his early morning thoughts. His clone had dismissed himself as the sun had been rising, letting his memories and discoveries crash into Tobarama's head. He really needed to work on smoothing out that part of the jutsu. Apparently, the Senju compound still stood. In the file, it was deemed inaccessible. In the special notes, It was speculated that the compound was protected by a combination of Uzumaki seals and his older brother's lingering Mokutan. That fact had Tobarama frowning. Mito was quite obviously in the Pure Lands now, and while he had nothing confirming that she was the last active Senju of the Leaf, he suspected it was so. It made him wonder what the political climate had been like, that his sister-in-law felt a need to implement trespasser seals and reawaken Hashirama's dormant siege trees. It was a worrying thought and only increased Tobarama's paranoia. Regardless, he now knew that he had a home. A fortress, really. And it was just waiting for him to return. Hopefully. He hoped Mito had put blood or chakra locks on those seals to allow future passage through and hadn't just locked it up for eternity. On a similar note, the Senju clan was labeled as extinct in Konoha records. In the privacy of his own mind, Tobarama cursed how Hashirama had encouraged their clansmen to become the village. It had been unnecessary and crippling. It rankled his pride, it hurt he was alone, that his own clan was dead while all the other clans survived and prospered, even the Uchiha. But there was one lone surviving member of the Senju clan. Little Tsuna-chan. She was why his clone had taken all night to gather information. Tsuna-chan had made a name for herself, becoming a Sannin and an advocate of the importance of medic nin to be trained up and implemented in the field. She became a war hero in the second great ninja world. There had been 3 wars now. Hashirama was never going to forgive him for not preserving or setting up lasting peace. Her files had noted she started to destabilize as the war progressed, and Tobarama wondered what had been done to try to support his grandniece, but he didn't see any notes or reports of enforced leave or mental health checkups with the Yamanaka clan, policies he'd personally pushed through during his tenure as Hokage. It was nice to see his work had been so casually trampled on, to the effect of driving his little Tsuna-chan into retirement and to last known location, unknown. Tobarama knew administrative speak enough to see that she was practically a missing nin that had been allowed to go free for publicity reasons and the body count that would have happened if they tried to bring her in. He felt pride and despair at hearing the fate of the giggling, pensive, and mischievous little niece he'd watched over. The last of her family and clan, war-broken and exhausted, and now without a village and clan. He would need to track her down as soon as possible. Though his duty to Naruto and to righting the village may keep him bound to this location, he could perhaps send out shadow clones or his summons. At least he wasn't going to be hurting for finances. No matter how Tsuna-chan picked up her grandfather's gambling vice, she'd been wise enough to leave the clan funds alone. The bank alone said a couple 100 million yen was sitting in the Senju name under a strict set of criteria on just who could withdraw the money. Again, Mito's work. Tobarama was going to kiss his sister-in-law's cheek for her foresight. Someone in his family had sense, and it was now going to be to the benefit of giving him and his little one a safe place and resources without strings attached. He'd just have to see if he could jump through the hoops she'd set up. The thought brought a wry smile to his face. He missed his brother, yes, but it was only really now sinking in that he'd also lost his sister too. He would need to find her grave to pay his respects and make a shrine again. It had upset him this morning when he hadn't been able to pray for Itama, Kawarama, Tuka, and Hashirama. Tobiaji-san, a pitiful voice wailed, and it was on the tip of his tongue to scold Hashirama for whining. But it was only Naruto behind him, standing by his most recent trap that Tobarama had evaded. The blonde pouted outrageously and crossed his arms huffily. It was a major improvement over this morning's downcast reddened eyes and subdued voice. Yes, he inquired innocently. The pout grew, if that was at all possible, and Naruto stomped his foot. You're not playing fair. No, I'm not, he agreed and nearly laughed when righteous anger suffused through chakra and thin face alike. Tobarama chuckled as he went back to the trap, taking a knee beside it. With a small touch, he shifted the leaf and tree branch cover hiding the ankle-deep mud spot. Your traps are good work, he praised, shifting the cover expertly. That skunk one was very clever. It would have alarmed an unaware enemy and made them easier to track. You take advantage of your surroundings, that's good. But they're easy to spot. He felt Naruto's chakra even out and sharpened to attention. The boy came to his shoulder and watched him work. On this entire path, do you see such a dense patch of fallen foliage? At his confused look, he repeated himself. Fallen branches and leaves. Oh. Naruto looked up and down the path before frowning. No, so there's two things you can do to hide your cover, the man explained. He pointed up to the trees above. You can artificially, fake, done by your hand and not naturally, cover a good portion of the path in leaves and branches. This makes an enemy believe that this is natural and they won't think twice about your particular spot. Naruto nodded, but wrinkled his nose when he looked up the great height to the tree tops. But that's way up there, he pointed out. Tobarama smiled and shifted to sit on his knees. Yes, but oftentimes shinobi do travel through the trees or walk on water. Civilians and shinobi pretending to be or traveling with civilians will take paths like this. You've noticed how a lot of shinobi travel over the rooftops, right? His nephew nodded eagerly. Yeah. I want to do that someday. It's so cool, believe it. I'll teach you, Tobarama promised. Back on topic, though. I mentioned one way is to disguise an entire area in order to hide your trap. But there is something else you can do that I think you'll find useful. The boy danced in place, glee and mischief bright in sky blue eyes. What is it? The umbu that came later fell perfectly into the trap. Naruto was practically howling in Tobarama's ear with laughter and he was smirking at his nephew's success. The umbu, bear, hung in the limp surprise of a non-threatened shinobi caught completely unaware. With the boy on his back, Tobarama had coached him through laying an obvious falling branch trap and then predicting where a shinobi would move to avoid the trap before trapping that path in a much more subtle manner. Lulling an enemy into a false sense of security by letting them dodge a trap only to get them on the second step. It was one of Tobarama's favorite ways of trapping. Bear curled up to examine the ninja wire wrapped around his ankle, a donation from Tobarama to Naruto so the second trap could be hidden properly. The umbu relaxed again and turned his masked face in his direction. Naidem-sama, he greeted quite calmly, though Tobarama took great satisfaction in the disgruntlement and annoyance in the man's chakra. He nodded in return, bouncing Naruto on his back absently. Bear-san. How many I help you? Upside down and caught, the umbu impressively remained professional as he pulled a scroll from a pouch and unsealed the contents, holding out a thick folder of papers. From Sandim-sama. Any humor Tobarama may have been feeling drained away. Showing a surprising amount of sensitivity, Naruto also quieted and climbed higher so his cheek could touch his uncle's. Tobarama branch-hopped closer and took the offered folder. He opened it one-handed, glancing at the first page, before closing it again. It was the guardianship paper signed with the Hokage's executive clearance and relevant files on Naruto. At least Sara moved fast. The man hummed and leapt back, giving Naruto the folder to hold. My thanks, he intoned. Tell Saru I'll be in touch with him and his old squad mates soon enough. Let the man sweat over that for a while. It would make him worry while Tobarama got settled. It's lunch time, Naruto. Are you hungry? He asked, turning his back on the umbu. He should be able to figure out how to free himself. Yeah, believe it, the boy cheered. Let's get ramen. You can meet old man Tucci. Tobarama deadpanned for a moment. He had funds from his stash and the generosity of Hound the night before, but if Naruto had as much of an appetite for ramen as Mito did then he wouldn't be able to keep up. Why don't we head home for lunch and for dinner get ramen, he suggested, pausing to create a shadow clone. The clone disappeared off to the bank without having to be told. He changed course and bounded over the playground in the park, heading back towards the red light district. Naruto oohed and awed for a moment over the cool jutsu before refocusing. But I want ramen now. It's been forever since I've been to Ichiraku. We'll go tonight, Tobarama promised, knowing that even if the bank didn't cooperate he'd have to take Naruto out to get ramen. I'll teach you more about trapping over lunch, he bribed. I can even show you a few seals to make things interesting. Seals? Naruto repeated curiously. Oh, Sprout, I'm going to show you why the Uzumaki clan was the most feared in the entire land. He never let what anyone said about his preparedness, paranoia, bother him. Whether teasing, sneering, or taunting, Tobarama still went to whatever lengths he felt he needed to in order to be as prepared as he could. It had saved his life many times before when facing Izuna and saved the lives of many of the people under his protection. This situation may not be life-threatening, but Tobarama still appreciated being right. His Uzumaki Sprout was working on his 5th bowl of ramen, and the bank promissory notes tucked under his fur mantle brought him comfort and not a small bit of smug pride. It also kind of surprised him that the Ichiraku ramen Naruto had been going on about all day was in fact the same Ichiraku ramen business from the early founding of the village. Mito had been a frequent customer, sometimes dragging Tobarama out of his office to spend time with her brother. It was nice to see that the business was still in the same family and that the family had only improved upon their recipes. Another one, Tochiji-san. Naruto cried as he set his empty bowl on the growing pile. Please, Tobarama insisted. Another one please, Tochiji-san, Sprout obliged, and Tobarama huffed approvingly, making the boy beam. He really was too cute. Tobarama tried to resist the urge, but he gave up and wrapped his chakra around the boy again. The owner laughed and placed an already prepared bowl down in front of Naruto. Here you go. Eat up. Thank you for the food. Naruto repeated and dug in yet again. Tochi-san smiled and shook his head, looking up to meet Tobarama's own gaze. Uzumaki's, he said simply, and Tobarama nodded in agreement. I've heard from a good source that Ichiraku ramen is something to rival the ramen of Uzushio, Tobarama replied, slurping up his noodles happily. He'd grown to love the dish over the years. He still preferred cold noodles, but ramen was good, especially when it was salty. The man's eyebrows rose. Really? That's a high compliment. Who do I have to thank for it? The senju shrugged non-committally. It's been a long time since they or I have been here. You probably wouldn't know them. Tucci was a smart man. Had to be in order to be a civilian food stand that operated on the edge of the shinobi district. He let the evasion go with grace. Well, if you see them again, please pass my thanks along. Tobarama nodded, but busied himself with munching on a bit of fried fish. Say, I didn't catch your name, Shinobi-san. It's been a while since I've seen this little ball of energy, and I'm glad to see that he's doing okay. Tobarama blinked slowly, pausing mid-bite as he raised his eyes and scrutinized the other. To his credit, he only frowned slightly in response and held still. After a long moment, Tobarama swallowed and clicked his chopsticks together contemplatively. Before he could answer, Naruto burped loudly. Naruto, he scolded quietly, and the boy giggled, rubbing the back of his hand across his mouth. Tobarama pursed his lips at the sloppy behavior and reached for a napkin. Excuse me, he chirped. Hey, Ji-san. This is my uncle, Tobiaji-san, believe it. Tobarama licked the napkin, clicking his tongue to draw his nephew's attention. Hold still, he ordered and warned, all in 2 words. Naruto blinked in surprise before watching gamely as he reached out with the napkin. He seemed boggled as Tobarama rubbed the broth splatter and bits of noodles off his whiskered cheeks. The boy then burst into giggles and batted at Tobarama's hand. That tickles. The adult scared as he chased the child's face. Messy, he rumbled and scolded himself for a moment on his failed attempt to sound softer and kinder. He meant the word with fondness, but to his ears it came out as stern. He caught a flailing hand gently in 2 fingers and wiped the back of his hand too. When Naruto withdrew his hands and held them protectively to his chest, Tobarama let him go and wiggled his fingers at the boy. Better, he declared, raising an eyebrow when Naruto stuck his tongue out at him. His nephew just smiled a second later and went back to his ramen. After the moment had ended, Tucci spoke up. Uncle, he repeated in confusion, looking between the two. He ended up focusing on Naruto with a frown. I thought it was just you and Sandim-sama. The look of over-exaggerated panic that blew Naruto's eyes wide almost had Tobarama rolling his eyes. Tiny Hashirama. Tobarama prayed Naruto didn't inherit his Anija's habit of becoming depressed at the drop of a senbon. Shoo, he shushed the baffled food vendor, glancing at Tobarama. This time the Senju did roll his eyes. I'm not mad, he assured the boy. We can talk about Saru. The weight of the adoption papers tucked away in the special storage seal tattooed on his arm helped ease some of his ire. He turned his gaze to Tucci as he set his empty bowl on the countertop. Another one, please. And I am his uncle or cousin distantly through marriage. I am Tobarama Senju. Tucci slowed in his assembling for a moment. Senju. I haven't heard that name in a long. His expression darkened and Tobarama was impressed when the man leveled a glare at him. Impersonating our Naidame-sama is incredibly disrespectful and reckless. He flicked a look at Naruto before slowly straightening. Dare I ask if the Sandaime is aware of your presence around his grandson? Tobarama liked this man. A lot. He leaned forward to rest his chin on his hand, soothing the anxious flickering in Naruto's chakra. There is no impersonating or illusion happening now, Tucci-san. I am Tobarama Senju. He closed his eyes and breathed deep, taunting the man with being nonchalant despite being challenged. It's nice to know some things don't change. I first came here when the Mikio boys opened up. My sister, Mito, insisted on determining if there was any hope for ramen in Konoha. He opened his eyes again and regarded the floored man. So many years later, your family has only improved your work. Mito would have been pleased. Mito-sama was your sister, the man murmured before shaking himself, his hands moving once more as if on autopilot. That's impossible. Mito-sama was an elder when I was a boy. Tobarama hummed, nodding in thanks when a new bowl was set in front of him. Thank you. It's also seemingly impossible that I am the Naidame, he pointed out helpfully. Naruto snickered, calmer now that the atmosphere had settled. Time travel's supposed to be impossibles too, you know, he added, so pleased with himself to get in on the secret. Impossible, Tobarama corrected gently, but agreed with him. There was an irony somewhere in the fact that he'd accidentally done the impossible task that the entire Uzumaki clan had been trying to figure out for centuries. He didn't like the irony, but he could appreciate it. Mito would laugh when he shared it with her. Time travel, Tucci repeated, tone and expression flat. Uncle and nephew nodded in sync, not even trying to be understanding or give weight to the fact that time travel was possible and had happened. Tobarama paused and tilted his head, examining an approaching chakra signature. He turned in his chair and stepped towards the banner of the shop, reaching out to snag the collar of the passing shinobi. Cub, he greeted as he caught the reflexive kunai lashed out at him. He deposited the waif of a young man onto the stool next to him and picked up his chopsticks again. A house special for him, he requested, nodding at the stunned shinobi, who was blinking one lone dark eye at him. It took the youngling a good second and a half to gather himself, and Tobarama critically examined the low, banked levels of the shinobi's chakra levels, radiating exhaustion and aching depression. It was so different from the usual sparking and snapping feel of Hataki chakra. Ma, Naidame-sama, Cub said carelessly, finally returning the greeting. Can I help you with something? He returned his kunai to his thigh pouch. Could I actually change that into a pork miso with extra egg? He asked of Tucci. The man blinked before nodding, flashing a practiced pleasant smile. Of course, coming right up. Tobarama didn't miss how the food vendor looked back at him with wide eyes. Having an actual leaf shinobi backhandedly verify his story lent him some credit. When there was a tug on his sleeve, Tobarama turned to Naruto, who was half on the counter, trying to get a good look at the new addition. Tobiaji-san, who's that? Cub, he answered before tilting his head. A child of the Hataki clan. The young man hummed and reached up to scratch his cheek. Eh. It's been a long time since anyone called me that, Senju-sama. Kakashi Hatake. Finally, he had a name to go to the Inu Umbu character. And he was also surprised it was a name he'd so recently read. I am Tobarama Senju and this is my nephew, Naruto Uzumaki. He leaned back in his seat so Naruto didn't have to strain so hard. Hiya, the boy chirped, waving a hand, before squinting suspiciously. He pointedly sniffed. Hey, hey. You smell like Inu and I believe it. Tobarama raised an impressed eyebrow at the casual observation. And you got the same hair as him. Tobarama felt a flare of panic go through Kakashi, one that went surprisingly deep into his core. For a moment, Tobarama wondered if the man feared Naruto because of his tenant. He'd have to keep an eye on that. You have a dog for a brother, the other shinobi asked in obviously feigned alarm, making Naruto splutter at the wild assumption. Does that make you a dog too? He further goaded with innocent, musing thoughts spoken aloud. The Senju pointedly leaned forward again and returned to eating, letting Naruto rant about how he very much was not a dog and didn't have a dog for a brother. Hatake-san, he prompted when his nephew had huffily buried himself in ramen, muttering about crazy old men. Kakashi hummed. I'm curious. Those two words would have normally sent his ninja into a panic and had the Senju clan give his laboratory an even wider breadth than usual, but the people of this time didn't know any better. Would you answer a few of my questions? Irritatingly enough, the young man seemed to be affecting a lazy persona that would do even a Nara some credit. And an ignorant one. After a rapid slurp of noodles and affixing his mask back in place, the other shinobi blinked slowly and let the question hang unanswered for a few long minutes. It nearly irritated Tobarama. If the Hataki's chakra hadn't started stirring with unease and wariness, he would have snapped at him. It reminded Tobarama that he was still an unknown in the village and recognized and verified as the Naidame or not, he could still be a threat. Especially with his show of rage at their Sandame. As an Umbu and a Jonin of Konoha, Kakashi was right to give himself time to think of his answer with also the added benefit of maybe offsetting Tobarama. Kakashi hummed and tilted his head, making the lights of the shop gleam off his crooked Hitai-8. I can try, he eventually replied, stirring his ramen to bring the noodles back to the top. But I'm not sure what I might know that you don't. Tobarama narrowed his eyes the slightest bit before consciously relaxing. Depending on how honest the shinobi was letting himself be, he might actually try to answer Tobarama and he might have a feeling on what Tobarama was going to ask. I recently came to officially have guardianship over my nephew. Saru signed the papers today, he remarked, turning to smile slightly at the bouncing boy. He was slowing down and eating, either getting full or listening. Possibly both. Oh. Congratulations. The Senju nodded and swallowed his mouthful before continuing. As his guardian and family, I was also given a copy of all the paperwork in regards to him, including papers on searches for any surviving family. There was an agonized spike of distress in Hataki's chakra followed by a choking miasma of guilt that made Tobarama's skin crawl. Kakashi had caught onto his roundabout wording well enough. Tobarama hadn't sat down with Naruto yet to discuss the information in the file he'd been given. He didn't want to keep turning the boy's world upside, and speaking of the boy's parents and how they died would surely leave him shaken. It wasn't a talk Tobarama was looking forward to having. You know, in some orphans' cases, all their records are sealed up, Kakashi mused. It was for some odd reasons, he hummed and tapped his chopsticks against his mask. Tucci was glancing sharply between the two, but moved over to Naruto to strike up a conversation. Bettering their chances of adoption? Giving them a new, fresh start. I know some orphans were from shinobi families. Some would say there's safety in being hidden, no? Tobarama ground his teeth for a moment. He knew Naruto's records had been sealed as an S-class Hokage approval-only secret. The paperwork to make it so was also in the file. But if what Kakashi was saying was true, Naruto's records were sealed in an effort to protect him and make it easier for him to become a part of the village. And what would you say? He prodded, distracting himself with making sure Naruto drank his tea. The guilt was fading ever so slightly in the Hataki's chakra. I'm just a simple shinobi. I don't say much. Just obey. If Saru had made it an order as a Hokage, every shinobi and resident of Konoha would have had to comply, regardless of personal feelings and thoughts. Tobarama could sympathize. What few orders Hashirama had given him officially had been given in order to stymie and stop him when he wouldn't have otherwise. He feigned a sigh. Such is the lot of a shinobi. We must put away our feelings no matter what to complete our mission. Though I personally draw a line in the sand that I won't cross. Kakashi turned and looked at him, pushing away his empty ramen bowl. That has to be annoying to work around, he observed, but Tobarama didn't miss the wary and sharp gleam in his one eye. Curiously, Tobarama knew his other eye was still there. He could feel a blaze of chakra that was surprisingly different from Kakashi's own, under his Hitai 8. He met the Jonin's gaze equally. It's annoying that I find I even have to draw the line. No child should ever be hurt, abandoned, or killed simply because of orders. Another slow blink. There are some who don't share your opinion, he said frankly, and the Senju previously known as the White Demon gave a small and thin smile. It bared his teeth in threat. Not at Kakashi though. Because he wasn't expressing his own opinion. He was reporting. It's not an opinion, Hataki-san. It's law. The other shrugged lazily. Some are above the law. They're only above the law if others let them be. Others? Tobarama nodded and relaxed once more. I'm still getting a sense for Konoha of this time. I know the trunk of the tree is sick and needs to be cured, but I know the spirit of Konoha should still live in a few. Silence. Naruto and Tsuchi were having a rather spirited discussion about different types of ramen, but something was tense and waiting between Tobarama and Kakashi. Finally, the young man sighed and sagged. It's not just the trunk that grew crooked, he admitted softly, quietly, wary of any listeners. The very roots have turned on the tree. Tobarama pursed his lips but nodded. I have a line too, Naidame-sama. He blinked but tilted his head in question. Those who break the rules are trash. Those who disobey orders are trash. Tobarama felt a moment of dread, wondering if he'd read the man wrong, but then he continued. But those who leave their comrades behind are worse than trash. Oh. So this was his will of fire. Seems like a simple line, he replied, intentionally keeping his voice light despite the underlying dark tone of their conversation. Kakashi snorted as he got up from his stool. You'd be surprised, he muttered, a darkness swelling and cloying what should have been bright white chakra. It was nice to meet you, sir. You as well. Tobarama reached under his fur mantle and held an already filled-out promissory note to the man. Thank you for the groceries. The cub stared down at the note for a long moment before his shoulders shook in silent laughter. He took the note and shoved it into his pants pockets. All those places had kicked him out before, he murmured, nodding to Naruto. I shouldn't have even left money. But there's this pesky law about shinobi stealing from civilians. Tobarama clicked his tongue and snapped his chopsticks, imagining it as some necks. Pesky. You shouldn't have. But I've been teaching Naruto about trapping today. Kakashi gave a surprised bark of laughter. I've heard, he chuckled as he left the shop. After he had a satisfied little Uzumaki and had paid Tsuchi, they strolled their way through the Konoha evening streets. Even if Tobarama had changed out of his bodysuit and armor and into a more informal blue kimono shirt and gray pants, he was still getting looks and whispers from passing civilians and shinobi. The rumor mill of Konoha had been impressively fast back in his own time, and it seemed that it had remained so throughout the years. Tales of his return were no doubt making their rounds. Normally he'd just let it go and let people think what they wanted, but he couldn't afford to have an angry crowd come for his head. He'd need to check in on what's being said and start spreading rumors himself if he had to. He tucked his hands into his sleeves and affected his usual stoic mask, only breaking it to send pointed glares at anyone whose attention strayed to the child he was careful to keep mostly hidden behind his body. "Hey, Aji-chan." Tobarama was a bit surprised over the change in suffix, but kept his silence. "Yes, Sprout?" Naruto flashed a smile up at him from where he was walking beside him, hands tucked behind his head. "Is Inu and I a friend? Or like Gigi?" he asked seriously. "'Cause, Inu and I's helped me a lot. He brings me food and stuff sometimes. I can tell 'cause he smells like blood and dog." Tobarama has never had an acute sense of smell, nor has he ever befriended an Inuzuka or Hatake enough to inquire about their senses. He wondered at the extent of such an ability and then wondered if Naruto had it due to the fox, because that wasn't a characteristic naturally found in the Uzumaki line. "He's nice," Naruto continued, kicking a rock as he walked. "When I'd run away from the orphan kid place, 'cause the head lady was mean, believe it." Tobarama definitely believed it and made a mental note to tear apart the personnel operating the orphanage later. "I'd fall asleep in a park or someplace. And I wake up quick like a ninja, right?" He watched in amusement as Naruto grinned with pride and bounced a little on his toes. "So, when a person came and picked me up, I woke up. I just pretended I didn't." "Sneaky, sneaky, believe it." "Very sneaky," Tobarama agreed in a serious tone, even if he was pretty sure whoever picked him up, given the start of the conversation, he could hazard a guess who it was, knew Naruto was feigning sleep. The mental image amused him. When he'd created and founded the Umbu Corps, he hadn't imagined them as babysitters, but if Naruto had come to see them, or just Inu, as a constant in his life, then he'd be slightly mollified. The boy basked in the praise and pride for a moment longer before refocusing. "Yeah, and it was always Inu and I. He called me Naruchan or little son." Inwardly, Tobarama melted at the pleased flush on his nephew's cheeks. It seemed he owed Kakashi a bit more gratitude than he originally thought. And more grace on his initial judgment over how the lone surviving student of the child's father hadn't reached out to Naruto, orders or not. The Senju exhaled softly before humming aloud. "I can't see why he would call you little son," he lied, waiting for a reaction. Naruto, of course, took offense. "Huh? Aji-chan, you gotta be blind. It's 'cause of my hair, believe it." "Your hair," the adult repeated in false bafflement. "But the sun isn't blue." "Be blue?" The boy's hands flew up to his hair and smushed his bangs down into his eyes to see it. "I have yellow hair." "Aji-chan, you are blind." Tobarama chuckled to himself. Kids were so easy to rile. "Such disrespect," he replied, admittedly missing the mark on sounding offended. Usually when he sounded upset, he also sounded angry as well, and he didn't want to risk that. Naruto stuck his tongue out at him, pulling down an eyelid. "Children." "Old man," he taunted, and this time Tobarama rolled his eyes and allowed himself to stick his tongue out in return. Naruto gaped in shock and then laughed merrily. He bounced and reached to tug at Tobarama's shirt hem. "You're funny." The Senju gave the boy a small smile, accepting the compliment. Hey. So is Inu and I a friend or not?" Naruto prompted again. Tobarama thought for a moment. "I'm not completely sure. I believe he's an ally. A friend. But he's bound by his duty to the village." The boy frowned. "Duty?" He blinked before giggling. "Duty, bathroom humor. Tobarama has not missed thee." Ignoring the play on words with only a twitch, he answered, "A responsibility to something. Because Kakashi is a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf, he must obey the orders of the Hokage and fulfill the missions given to him to the best of his ability. Even if he doesn't agree with them." Naruto squinted, kicking his feet out in exaggerated steps. So he's a friend, but his responsibris punsa respawn si bilitai, Tobarama sounded out. Yeah, that. But 'cause of that, he's not a friend. Close. A shinobi must be loyal to their village and Hokage above all else. You are very precious and important to the village. Naruto scowled and Tobarama was quick to catch and soothe that angry and betrayed spike in his chakra. If the boy hadn't been convinced of Sara's wrongdoings before Tobarama had told the truth of his situation, he was now. Sara would have to do some quick talking the next time he was around the boy because Naruto's trust in him was very much shaken. A bit of guilt threaded through Tobarama and he found himself sighing. I do not doubt that Sara cares for you, Sprout, he continued, despite the possible lie tasting bitter on his tongue. You will be protected by the village no matter what. Even from me. Naruto stopped in his tracks and gaped at Tobarama. What? He gasped and the man reached out to steady the swaying boy. I am a new variable in this game, Tobarama explained, carefully picking his words so he could be understood. I have been gone for 40 years. Many things have changed but I have not. He pursed his lips before squeezing a bony shoulder. He didn't want to scare the boy, but he didn't want to lie either. I want to believe your Inu is a friend. But should he or the village or the Hokage decide I am a threat or no good for you, he may be ordered to come against me and he is bound by duty to do so. But you're the Nidaime. How can you be a threat to the village? To me? Tobarama shushed his nephew, trying to keep from drawing too much attention. It's okay, he promised, taking a knee and brushing blonde bangs away from alarmed blue eyes. It's okay, Naruto. I swear to you that I am your family and I am not going anywhere. No matter what anyone decides, I will remain right here with you. He cupped Naruto's jaw. It shot a bolt of fear through him when he realized his entire hand could hold the child's jaw. He was that small and vulnerable. And trusting. Naruto leaned into the hand and Tobarama remembered he hadn't given the boy warning of his touch. Thankfully, he hadn't flinched or shied away, but it also humbled Tobarama beyond measure. Naruto believed on some level that he wouldn't hurt him. Tobarama swallowed roughly and breathed deep through his nose. This is how things are going to turn out, he started. You and I are going to look about moving into my old home, so we can live and train properly. We will make sure the village does not see me as a threat and sees that we are family. I can't promise that something won't try to separate us, but I can promise that they won't succeed. Understand? Naruto nodded firmly, a spark of determination shining bright in his eyes. We will see about making allies so we have backup and protection. This wasn't a battlefield that he could dominate through sheer strength alone. If Kakashi's vague warning was even barely credible, the political landscape of Konoha was treacherous and Tobarama would need to quickly find safe or neutral ground and allies loyal to primarily himself and Naruto. For once, Tobarama acutely felt the lack of his Hokage hat. It would have guaranteed some loyalty and fear. That advantage, however, remained in the leaf. He wondered when he started considered the village a threat. That was a truly disturbing thought. We'll make friends? Naruto's question jarred him out of his dark thoughts and he nodded. Yes, we will. We'll make ourselves safe and at home. How does that sound? His sprout nodded again and grinned. Yeah. I like this plan. I always wanted friends. He froze for a moment before spearing Tobarama in place with sharp eyes. Hey, we're friends, right, Aji-chan? It was on the tip of his tongue to point out that they were family, of course they were friends. But Tobarama remembered with distaste that blood did not always promise loyalty or good intentions. Yes. He chucked a finger under Naruto's chin, making the child's teeth click lightly. We're friends, Sprout. Pinky promise. Oh, this infant of a child was going to be the death of him. Still, he wrapped his smallest digit around Naruto's much smaller one. Pinky promise. Naruto jerked awake with a muffled cry, his teeth biting hard into his lower lip. He breathed roughly in through his nose, coughing when the snot there tried to kill him. But no one yelled out, no hands reached through the darkness to hit him or grab his hair. He was okay. A low, rolling chirp caught his hearing and he flinched at the new sound, before realizing he could hear a soft rumbling. The sound rose and fell rhythmically, up and down, up and down. It sent his heart racing for a moment because he was reminded of those really big tigers in the fenced-in forest. Though this sound was softer. Not a growl but sprout. The voice was low and rough with the unidentifiable rumbling sound, but he knew it was his uncle. Naruto blinked again, trying to see in the dark. The longer he listened to the rumble sound, the easier it was for him to let his nightmare go. Yet another rolling chirp came and this time he could hear his uncle's voice in the sound. And something weird and deep in him knew it was call, waiting for an answer. His throat felt tight for a second before he coughed, clearing it. Why yeah? When the rumbling sound went silent, Naruto nearly panicked. It was suddenly too quiet, too empty. But then his uncle spoke again. A nightmare, he murmured, the words carrying across the quiet of the apartment. Sound and scent, iron blood, fur, and tea, told him that Tobarama was across the apartment near the bathroom, where he'd sat and slept last night too. Naruto hadn't even known why he'd done that until he'd been trying to sleep, wiping snot on his blanket, and wondered if the other man was watching him. It had struck fear in him and made him look around the apartment, only to find him against the other wall, sitting with crossed legs and crossed arms asleep. Naruto hadn't realized until then that he wouldn't like an invasion of space and privacy. He always dreamed of someone living with him, giving him hugs like he's seen parents give their kids and welcoming him home. He hadn't known that actually having someone in his space might bother him. But now the space was too big. In the dark, he couldn't see the walls. It looked like the dark was growing and reaching for him. Sprout? Naruto jumped and clung to his blanket before stilling when he heard a rustle of fabric. The purring chirping coughing came again as footsteps came closer. Hey, the boy whispered as he heard and kinda saw the massive dark shape of his uncle. Tobarama was big and tall. Taller than anyone, believe it. It made him a bit hard to look at sometimes, but that was okay. Uncle Toby always made sure he didn't scare him. Hello, his uncle returned, shifting until Naruto thought he was sitting crisscross applesauce again. Are you okay? Naruto's hands tightened on his blanket. He wanted to reach out and hug the man. He wanted that so bad, but the thought of touching anything, moving from his bed, made his stomach roll. His throat closed up, torn between so many directions. He didn't know what to do or say and he had to answer or the adult would get mad. It's okay, Sprout, Tobarama said lowly. It's okay. We're here in your apartment. You're sitting in your bed. My name is Tobarama Senju and your name is, he swallowed loudly. And Naruto. Uzumaki. He tried to take a deep breath and found it hard. It was like a fat person was sitting on his chest. It was hard. Good. That's good, Naruto. I'm 38 years old. How old are you? The boy's nose wrinkled. Old, he muttered only to freeze for a moment, heart pounding. Only. Instead of yelling or anger, the man chuckled, the sound similar to that rumble sound earlier. I suppose so, yes. Growing up, no one expected to live past 30. I even have the hair for it, no? Naruto breathed, in and out. It was kind of funny. His uncle did have old people hair. He hummed in answer. Silence settled again, and this time it wasn't so bad. Naruto could hear himself breathing. He could hear Uncle Toby breathing. It wasn't all good, but it was better. The shadows weren't out to get him anymore, chased away by someone else being here. They couldn't get him if his uncle could save him. Bad dream? The man asked after what felt like forever. This time, Naruto could answer. He nodded and looked away, ashamed. Shinobi didn't get scared. If he wanted to be Hokage, he couldn't keep having bad dreams like this. Do you want to talk about it? Reaching hands, hateful looks, choking, hurting, dying. No. Okay. Would you like? Naruto peered up at the top of the shadow of his uncle. He could almost see the man's hair, it seemed to glow. HM. A story? Something to drink? I never like to go back to sleep so soon after a bad dream. It comes back. The boy blinked and his jaw dropped. Wait. You get bad dreams? Of course. Naruto scrambled to get up on his knees, trying to squint through the dark and see if Tobarama was lying. But shinobi are said to be not scared, believe it. You were the Hokage. You can't have bad dreams. Nephew, I have more nightmares than you could ever imagine. Naruto sat back on his heels hard, staring blankly. Any shinobi will see things, do things that are haunting and terrible. Any shinobi will come away with things they can't forget. I've seen many things and done so much worse. Everyone is afraid of something. Even shinobi. Even the Hokage. Especially all of them. But Naruto frowned. But shinobi can't be scared. And why's that? His frown deepened. 'Cause then they can't do anything. They'd be crybabies and that's not cool, believe it. He felt more than heard the huff of air Tobarama gave. There is nothing more deadly than a shinobi with fear in his heart. A scared shinobi will do anything to survive, to escape, to get home. Even I have had to be extra careful around people who are cornered and afraid. I cannot predict them and I know they will hold nothing back against me. Yes, fear can make you weak, control you, freeze you. Naruto nodded, knowing this one personally. But it can also be a strength. Fear has carried me home quite a few times and saved my family on occasion. Silence again. It's a bit late, or early, for philosophy, however. Do you feel better? Naruto shuffled, trying to think, understand. His uncle said a lot of big words, but he could get the gist. Maybe not really get it, but he was getting sleepy. He yawned, lifting his blanket to cover it. Good. Naruto heard Tobarama stand up and a thought occurred to him as he pulled his own blanket closer against the cold night air. Aren't you cold? You don't have a blanket, I keep myself warm. Don't worry. But Naruto did. He didn't mean to, but he felt bad. He'd woken his uncle up in the middle of the night with his maybe not stupid, cry baby bad dream. And Uncle Toby didn't even have a bed or a blanket. I can share, he blurted, biting his lip. It's all right. That's your bed. If I get cold or uncomfortable, I have some camping supplies with me. A quiet beat. You promise? I swear. Do I need to pinky promise? Naruto giggled and laid back down, pulling his blanket up over his face. A question popped up in his head. Tobiaji-chan? Yes, came the patient answer, back across the apartment. The boy sat back up. What was that sound? The first one. A trait from my summons. I didn't want to scare you by speaking after you just woke up. I was purring. Naruto didn't know what a summons was, but he knew what purring was. His uncle sounded different from any cat he'd heard before, but it was nice. He hesitated, wondering if he could ask. It was so quiet still and normally it didn't bother him, but tonight was just weird and scary. Can you? He trailed off uncertainly, sucking his lip in. His breath caught when the rumbly sound, Uncle Toby purring, reached him. It really did sound nice and cool. Thanks, he whispered as he laid back down, his eyes feeling heavy as he listened to the up and down, rise and fall and how loud the purring was. Listen to his uncle breathe through the purring, in and out, in and out, in and sleep well. Tobarama narrowed his eyes at the seemingly innocent line of trees in front of him. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a perfectly innocuous tree line with the path disappearing into it. What's wrong? He stopped squinting suspiciously and looked down at the small blond boy at this side. The child barely even reached his waist, tilting his head back almost entirely in order to look at him properly. He glanced back at the trees before humming. This was a good chance for a practical lesson. Do you remember what I've taught you about seals? He asked, taking a couple slow steps forward, trying to sense where the boundary was precisely. Naruto followed half a step behind and halted readily when Tobarama put a hand in front of him. Yeah? You were telling me what seals could do and what they look like. Tobarama nodded as he knelt, recalling how his nephew had easily picked up the basics of seal structure just from looking at it. He hadn't quite gotten a measure of Naruto's natural intelligence yet, so he wasn't sure if that was his Uzumaki genes showing, innate genius, or both. Still, it pleased him that the boy now knew the importance of containing a seal and its properties safely. I believe I missed telling you a usage for seals. It's not common, but it is useful. The man gestured at the air in front of him. This is an illusion. Like a genjutsu. There's a seal at work here. He glanced at the boy, who glanced around dubiously before looking back at him. Ji-chan, I think you might be crazy, the gall of this brat. Tobarama smirked and nudged his elbow into Naruto's side, unsteadying him for a moment. Look, he instructed, moving his pointer finger down to the ground just in front of their feet. One pointed burst of chakra through his finger and the first illusion was dispelled, revealing a large square stone with a seal carved into it. Whoa! Naruto spluttered and Tobarama preened a bit, keeping the boy from pushing his head through the illusion boundary as he leaned in closer to look at the seal. It's a seal. Yes, it is. It's fairly complex. He pointed to the two markings on either side of the seal. These are symbols for hidden or illusion. Basically, these two say, don't look at me. But when I disrupted the flow of chakra, I revealed it. Like removing a person's hinge. The boy nodded, seemingly not minding the hand holding the back of his coat. MMK. So squiggly water waves mean it's hiding. Yes. But note how one symbol is upright and the other is upside down. This creates a balance in the seal, keeping it stable for a longer period of time and hidden from all directions. Oh. Like that thing where something looks the same on both sides. Symmetry? Yeah. Exactly. Now, look at the seal as a whole. Do you notice anything? Naruto tilted his head from side to side, squinting hard. Tobarama wondered if the boy needed glasses. The boy frowned a second later and glanced up at him. Hey, isn't that a bigger squiggly water wave? Tobarama smiled, very pleased. Yes, it is. Very good eye, Naruto. Naruto squirmed from where he was practically being held suspended by Tobarama's hand on his coat back and pumped his fist into the air. Cool. Just you watch, Ji-chan. I'll become a seal master, believe it. He missed working with children. He truly did. I believe you, he chuckled. So can you guess what the larger illusion symbol is doing? Hiding something, the boy answered promptly before thinking, glancing back at the seal. But not the seal, he muttered. After a moment he crossed his arms and Tobarama felt an anticipatory thrill run through him. Something bigger? Correct. Oftentimes, the size of the seal or symbol does not matter so long as you get the details and lines correct, but seals do have limits for how much chakra it can channel at any given time. For what this seal is doing, for how long it's been working, it needed this larger space. He reached out and tapped the very center of the seal. This symbol means line or territory. This seal has created a boundary, a wall, and the larger illusion symbol has been keeping it invisible. The look of awe and shock on Naruto's face made Tobarama want to smile again. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had such an attentive and wowed student. No, that was wrong. He remembered Kagami quite well. Sealing, jutsu, and science were all so thrilling and satisfying. It was nice to be able to share his passion again. That's so cool. Naruto screeched, his eyes sparkling brightly. His chakra, warm and popping, whirled like a fire whirlpool to Tobarama's senses. Seals can do that? How big is the line, boundary? The Senju set his nephew back on his feet away from the barrier and straightened. Big, he answered simply. Now. Do as I do. He turned and stepped forward, putting his sandaled foot on the seal and passing through the barrier. The seal flashed the trigger up through his chakra coils, performing its check, but when it found his core to be Senju, it exited again with a fizzle of welcome/family. Tobarama huffed, recognizing Mito's signature touch to bloodline check seals. She valued and loved family and clan possibly more than he, Hashirama, and Madara ever had. He heard Naruto squawk behind him and turned to see the boy flutter his hands, eyes darting around. The boundary seal had hidden Tobarama from view the moment he'd passed through, which would be surprising to anyone who didn't know that. He crossed his arms and waited, silently encouraging his nephew to trust him. Naruto blinked several times before sniffing the air and then opening his mouth to inhale. Curious. Usually tasting the air was a reptilian or avian trait, not a mammal one. Nevertheless, Naruto was looking to have some innate tracking talents. His eyes fell down to the seal before he took a deep breath and screwed his eyes shut. Bravely, he stepped on the seal and walked forward, right into Tobarama's legs. Rather than be startled, the child giggled and rubbed his hands over his arms and chest. That tickled. The man hummed. Yes, Mito liked to welcome her family back even if she wasn't present. Blue eyes blinked up at him. Mito? Your sister? My sister-in-law. She was the heir to the Uzumaki clan until she married my Anija. Her seal, he nodded to the stone, recognized you as Uzumaki and welcomed you home. When the boy sniffled and blinked rapidly, he reached down and pressed the boy closer to his legs, encouraging him to latch on. He did so readily and Tobarama allowed him some time. Outside the barrier, he could feel their Umbu guard and watchers buzzing agitatedly. Upset that their charges had disappeared from their senses and sight. A pair even appeared a few feet away, oblivious to the fact that he and Naruto were right in front of them. They looked at the seal curiously, but were wise enough to not poke at it. Just to be sure, Tobarama sent a burst of chakra at the seal and returned it back to its original hidden view. Sealing is cool, believe it, Naruto sniffled, stepping back from him and scrubbing his face. You said this was home? Ah, he grunted, turning so they could both face the clan compound entrance. Shaded almost completely by the true and present trees that towered over their heads. A wall as sturdy as the village wall, though much shorter, stood in front of them, brought together by large double gates with the Senju Vajra carved into it. This is the Senju compound, where my clan lived. Huhua, Naruto breathed, stepping forward, heedless of the other bloodline check seals he passed over that verified his identity. It sits an actual secret hidden village. Quite. Hold. He came even with his nephew's side and peered up at the looming trees, watching closely as they swayed and groaned in a breeze that wasn't there. He could feel Hashirama's chakra in the trees. It shared none of the awareness and buoyancy that had been there when his brother had been alive, but the sunny light chakra threaded from the roots to the trunk to the leaves that were now straining down to reach them. He'd worn his armor today, slightly worried a trap would be triggered or the trees would have forgotten him, but he should have known to trust his Anija's words. Tobarama took a deep breath and upturned his face as leaves brushed over his cheeks and hair. The chakra, his brother's and nature's, pulsed happily. My connection to my Mokutan just keeps getting stronger, Hashirama had once admitted, tending to the garden at his house. Sometimes I don't remember that I'm not supposed to have roots or that I can move without help. Oh, don't look so worried, Tobarama. I've got a long time in me yet. Besides, even when my time does come, the trees will still be here. They've been with me and me with them for so long that they know you and Mito. It's not always me doing it when you see nature moving around you. It was a bittersweet pain, feeling and knowing his brother and sister still had legacies and protections in this mortal life that knew and welcomed him like no time had passed. It made him miss them all the more. Are these ninja trees? I've never seen trees move like this, believe it. Hashirama would have loved Naruto. So would have Mito. My brother grew these trees, Tobarama explained as he walked up to the gates of the place he'd called home for years. Do you know about the Shodame and his Mokutan? Wood style? His nephew repeated in confusion, barely looking away from the swaying and shivering trees. What's that? It's what it sounds like. It's a Kekkei Genkai belonging to the Senju clan that allows the users to call upon the trees and land to fight for them. My brother was vastly strong due to it. That's why he became Hokage. Hm. One of the reasons, yes. Before he could reach out and push the gates open, a seal even he hadn't noticed before blazed to life, performing one last function that reached out over the entire compound. The chakra in this seal, however, was different from Mito's. He'd only felt it in its infancy. Tsunechan had laid this seal, the one that freed the compound from lockdown and lifted what felt like a preservation, stasis seal. The gates opened, pushed by a soft explosion of released air, and revealed the ghost town that was his clan compound. Despite it being years since anyone was last here, everything, buildings and paths, looked to be in perfect condition. No plant overgrowth to reclaim land, no brittle, failing wood, no dead grass. He could even hear a couple sozu clacking in the distance, breaking the thick silence. Everything was right. Everything was as it should be. Except it was painfully bare of life. Tobarama had never been so ungrateful to his sensor ability before. Usually, when he found himself away from loud and shifting chakra presences, he was relieved and took what peace he could. In this part of the village, he was fairly removed from the hustle of the village. It was quiet. But the aching nothingness of his clan compound hurt. There wasn't the sound of children playing or training, mothers calling for mealtime, men laughing and telling stories, cousins calling out for each other. It was silent and empty. A small hand slipped into his own and he squeezed it gently. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, pushing down any melancholy and loneliness in his heart. Tobarama led the way to the main house, where he'd moved back in after Hashirama had passed, helping Mito with the house, children, and grandchildren. He refused to look at the thriving flowers around the house entrance and instead opened the door with a hand that didn't shake. A dark and shadowed hallway loomed in front of him and he very suddenly did not want to be here. It wasn't home. You have to say, I'm home. The small voice nearly startled him and he frowned down at Naruto. The boy wiggled the hand he was still holding. You have to say, I'm home, he repeated. Tobarama glanced back down the hall and he could almost imagine little Tsunechan charging down towards him with a happy screech, Mito following at a more sedate and graceful pace, and Kimitata leaning his head out of the kitchen. He licked his lips and looked back at his nephew. No one's here, he said lowly, denying the hurt that came with those words. The boy scowled, an expression he would have otherwise found adorable if he was in the mood. Don't matter, he stated imperiously. You have to say it. You don't know. Maybe someone will say, welcome home, believe it. Naruto, you got to. Tobarama squeezed his eyes shut, trying to calm himself. He'd known, objectively, that only he and an absent Tsunechan were all that remained of their clan. The rest dead or forgotten their roots as they focused on the families they married into. But it hadn't hit him until now just how much it hurt to not have a clan anymore. Home, he managed to whisper into nothing. Welcome home. Tobarama felt his throat close as he opened his eyes again to find his precious little nephew staring up at him with a trembling chin. Welcome home, Tobiaji-chan. All his little nieces and nephews had called him the same thing. He huffed and sat down hard on the Genkan, giving his back to the empty house and gone family. "Welcome home, Sprout," he returned, pulling the boy into a hard hug. The boy squirmed and wiggled, but hugged just as hard once he got his face into his fur mantle and next to his neck. After a few long moments, Tobarama felt back in control and let his nephew go. The boy kept his hands clutched tight in his fur mantle and traced over his expression with sharp eyes. Naruto eventually pouted and freed one hand to pat Tobarama's cheek. "It'll be okay," he promised with every ounce of authority a 5-year-old had, which was a surprising amount. "It will be," he agreed, once again rising to his full height, ignoring aching joints and stupidly weak muscles. Emotions always left him off-balanced and feeling his age. Tobarama took Naruto's hand this time. "Come. There's something I want to show you." They left his house and its emptiness behind in favor of moving to the rear of the compound, where the Senju clan's love and passion for all things earthy and green truly showed. A beautiful garden thriving with trees and flowers and bushes flourished around a lazily flowing stream he'd personally made when the Senju compound had been moved to Konoha. And in the center of it grew a massive, old oak, its branches winding out to cover the entire garden. "This is our family tree," Tobarama explained as he led the boy to the garden, crossing a small bridge over the stream to get to the island the oak rested on. "This tree has been with our clan since we first became a clan, and it has watched over countless generations. Births and deaths. Celebrations and tragedies. Wherever the Senju go, this tree goes with. We call it our ancestor tree." He sank down to his knees and sat on his heels not too far from the thick healthy roots of the tree. Naruto copied him a moment later, looking puzzled but attentive. This tree was why the Senju clan had warred with the Uchiha for so many decades rather than simply moving to new territory. The Mokuton Kekkei Genkai had skipped several generations until Hashirama had been born. It was due to his brother's ability that the Senju clan had migrated to this cliffed valley and come to live in Konoha, taking extreme care in personally moving the ancestor tree to their new land and coaxing the roots into new soil. It's believed that our Kekkei Genkai was originally gifted to us from this tree, when a man long, long ago saw a sprout struggling to survive and grow. Naruto blinked and pointed a finger at himself. "Sprout?" Tobarama smiled and ran a gentle hand through golden locks. "Yes, exactly," he whispered, voice wet and rough. He hadn't had the honor of doing this since his own little brothers had been born, but then he'd been back not even a decade later, twice, to pray the ancestor tree watch over his little brothers and shelter them in the Pure Lands. This man cared for and nourished the little sprout, shielding it from harsh cold winters and greedy humans that would look to cut it down for wood. Years and years passed and this tree grew and grew. When the man was old and frail with sons and his sons with sons, the tree spoke. "Trees can talk," Naruto exclaimed, shocked. Tobarama thought back to his own ninja, spending hours in gardens or in the forest, listening, feeling. To those who can listen. Two cannot hear them. Not like you think. Not like how my brother used to hear them. But they do speak. There were many times in the past that he always explained away as instinct and luck, foreknowledge and foreboding he had no logical way of knowing, but in the back corner of his mind he knew he was a Senju, brother to a powerful Mokuton user. He cleared his throat and continued his story. "And this tree spoke to the now old man and it said thank you. Thank you for caring for me, for protecting me. How can I repay you?" And the old man merely laughed. "The old man," he said, "you have sheltered my family and I for so long, kept us dry and hidden. That is thanks enough." That night, the old man passed and the tree wept. It wept and wept, its leaves falling like rain. The old man's sons wept with it, and under the tree they buried their father, ensuring he would always be protected and watched over. And the tree spoke again. Tobarama nodded at Naruto's gaping expression. The tree thanked the sons for giving it their father, so they may be together forever. And it asked them how it could repay them. The sons answered, Teach us your knowledge so we can protect you and our father. Teach us so we may teach our sons and they may teach their sons. And so the tree did. It taught them 1,000 skills, earning them the name Senju, and gifted them with the ability to hear, to speak, and to fight with the tree's kin. Our Mokutan Kekiai Genkai. Naruto smiled and looked up at the tree, clapping quietly. This tree did all that? He asked in wonder. Tobarama hummed in affirmative, even if he believed the story was faintly off. It was a rumor in the Senju clan, mentioned in whispers by the elders as they watched Hashirama practice his Mokutan with prodigious skill. Not even in the clan archives had Tobarama been able to confirm it, but as his brother aged and changed, Tobarama came to suspect the same. Those strong in Mokutan, if they did not fall in battle or to illness, eventually became one with their skill. They became the skill and chakra that came as easy as breathing to them until it didn't. He personally believed that this tree was an ancestor of his, the first to exhibit the genetic mutation of their Kekiai Genkai and become strong enough in it to have been called completely to nature as his brother inevitably would have been. But his theory didn't dampen his own awe and reverence for this tree. If anything, it solidified it. He was not a pious man, but this tree, if he was right, was family and undeniable proof of the Senju clan's deep and lasting connection to something as precious and full of life as nature itself. It humbled him. He cleared his throat and ran his nails gently over his nephew's scalp. It is tradition, he continued, that when a new member is gifted to our clan we present them to the ancestor tree and ask it for guidance and protection, for welcome and succor. He breathed deep and looked back to his sprout. If you would allow me, I would present you to our ancestor tree. To formally take you into the Senju clan and claim you as clan and kin. Formal, ancient words that were normally spoken to a person recently married to someone from outside the clan. Very rarely did the Senju clan take in orphans or outsiders. But Naruto was family and Tobarama dearly wished to call him kin. Naruto's jaw dropped as he stared up at Tobarama. You want, he looked wildly between the tree and the man, speechless. By the law of this village, I am your guardian and you are my charge. By marriage some time ago, you are my nephew or cousin. He nodded to the ancestor tree. By the old Senju clan way, I want to name you kin. You would belong to my clan, live under its protection and roof, call upon our sigil to battle, learn our 1,000 skills, and call our blood home. Yes, Naruto rasped, tears dripping from shiny blue eyes. Yes, 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 please. He hiccuped a sob and tried to wipe his face clean. I want that. I want to be clan and family and home please, Aji-chan, please. Tobarama leaned down and shushed the boy, pulling his rough hands away and gently wiping his face clean and dry. It will be so, he swore, trying to keep from being overwhelmed again. He pressed an impulsive kiss to the boy's forehead and buried his face in sunny hair. It will be so. Gently, he pulled the boy to his side and wrapped a secure arm around his shoulders. Once the child was coherent enough to look at him, waiting, he folded them both forward into a bow. Tobarama squeezed his eyes shut. Old memories, times of joy and earth-shattering, soul-ripping grief, surged to the fore of his mind. He breathed through it and recalled the ceremonial words. By family, kin, and blood, I, Tobarama Senju, come to beseech our great and venerated ancestral tree, he invoked, and just like the 4 times before he felt the nature chakra of his surroundings spin to a halt, watching, waiting. I, first presented son of Himari Senju, named on these very roots, bring tidings of joy and celebration. The leaves overhead rustled and the sozu in the distance silenced. New life, new growth. I bring a sprout to our garden, our ancestral tree. A precious life, to love, to care for, to protect. Naruto shook at his side, sobbing quietly. I, Tobarama Senju, name this sprout clan and kin. I name him my own. He gritted his teeth, trying to keep his voice clear and steady through the sheer emotion trying to choke him because Naruto was his and he would always be his. I bring him here today before our great ancestral tree to beseech welcome unto his small life. I beseech and beg for his acceptance as mine, as clan, as kin, as Senju. The air around them warmed to an unnatural degree, heavy and pregnant with chakra and life. It wrapped around him in Naruto, infinite in a way not even Hashirama had ever felt. By old clan ways lost in tales and fables, something heard him. And it answered. The creak of wood sounded overhead and Tobarama coaxed a shivering and shuddering Naruto to rise, to look to the boughs above. Right before their eyes, a new branch grew, sprouting from a larger paler limb. It didn't grow for long, thin and new with life, but it flourished with bright and healthy leaves. A new member to their ancestral tree. This time, Tobarama didn't try to stop the tears from flowing from his eyes as he saw the new branch growing next to two scarred and fallen branch nubs. There were so many scarred rough spots on branches taken before they could sprout new life. But no more. No more, he swore to himself as he gathered his nephew, his kin, in his lap and to his chest, shushing his cries and gratitude. No more branches would fall. This one would never fall. He would personally see to it. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share. Want early audio-only versions? Join me on Patreon, link in description. I'm Fox Sage. See you next time.